Irene, and welcome to another session of TAO's Resiliency Series with Chris Berry, CEO of OhioX. I'm Kara Toronto, Chief Operating Officer of TAO, in case we have not met or we've only met online. A couple of rules of engagement. We have everybody muted, and we ask that you remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. If you have any questions for our guests, please post them in the chat. You may ask a question privately by directing your message to TAO admin, and we'll monitor this chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We will ask you to engage via the participant icon on your screen if you want to ask a question or just generally applaud our speaker. So engage with us on social during this call and throughout the rest of the day. We appreciate all your social support, and you can see where to find us on the slide. Due to our limited time, because we do stop this right at 9, we'll capture any and all questions in the chat and shift the unanswered ones to Mobilize, our member engagement platform. Mobilize is TAO's member-only virtual community, and we will post any responses to unanswered questions there to keep the conversation going after the event. If you have any questions about joining Mobilize or joining TAO, please reach out to membership@techoregon.org, which is also on the screen. And then our TAO staff support today is provided by Ruthie Ditzler, who's happy to take feedback, questions, comments, or discuss future sponsorship opportunities. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Berry. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's fun to be talking in a different part of the country. So it's, we can't go on vacation, so I get to go to the Pacific Northwest.
I understand that. I'm doing a panel tomorrow, and I'm actually interviewing one of my former coworkers from Atlanta. So this is like exciting times with the virtual. Why don't you actually tell us a little bit about yourself as we get started, and then we'll transition into some of these questions.
Sure. So I'm Chris Berry. I'm the president of OhioX, which, much like TAO, we are a statewide technology and innovation partnership. But unlike what you all have built and are building in Oregon, we're a newer group. So we've just been around and live for about a year and a half, which has been quite the year doing this in a pandemic. And so we just built it and launched in December of 2019. And then a few months into it, the pandemic hit. And so we've pretty much been a pandemic organization from almost day one, which has been challenging, but I think it's also built some opportunities. And so what we focus in, again, like a lot of groups like ours, is connecting, promoting, and advocating. And we were started because there's a bit of a void in Ohio when it came to technology and kind of the business community coming together on a statewide perspective, which we found out, hey, it actually happens in a lot of states across the country. And so for us, it was really cool to see what you all do in Oregon and groups in Georgia and North Carolina and Colorado and all over, which has been really fun and for us very helpful because we weren't insane and we had some really cool groups to look at and leaders to talk with that are already doing what we're trying to do.
That's super cool. So are you the only organization in Ohio doing what you're doing at a statewide level?
Yeah, pretty much. There's some different folks that do things, whether it's like regionally or maybe it's like statewide, but with like a very specific focus. But for kind of the, one-to-one, apples to apples with what you all do at TAO, yeah, we're the only one doing it. And so in Ohio, we're kind of a unique state in that we have a really diverse state, although we're not that big population-wise. We have about 11.5 million Ohioans, but we have all these metro areas that are really spread out. So what we in Ohio call the 3 Cs, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, are 3 big, that's kind of like having 3 Portlands in Oregon. And so for us, it's kind of interesting in that Cincinnati and Cleveland, sometimes they're almost different states. And so there's a ton of regional collaboration, and we built this with that idea in mind of the work is happening regionally in cities often, and they do great work, but there was kind of this missing component of doing it statewide and hopefully better connecting, because what's good for one part of the state is good for the rest.
So in that vein, we are a huge giant state land-wise, but we're actually a very teeny tiny population. 11 million dwarfs our 4 million that we have here in Oregon. But to your point, every part of the state could almost be viewed as a different state. And so, we have different tech hubs throughout Oregon that really do focus on different things in terms of the tech landscape. How would you describe Ohio's distribution of tech throughout the state? You've highlighted the three major cities.
Yeah.
Like, what does that sort of look like?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and a lot of there's a lot of similarities, and then there are also unique differences. And so some of the similarities are what Ohio's good at. And so our state has a really rich and proud tradition in things like manufacturing. Insurance is another big one. Healthcare is another. And so those are kind of three pillars that really stand out. And it doesn't matter if you're in northeastern Ohio or southwestern Ohio, which is about a 4.5 hour drive between the two. You kind of find those similar themes and those similar pillars regardless of where you look. And so that's kind of the similarities, but there's also some really interesting unique things that are going on. And so right now in the Youngstown area, which has gotten over the past few years and is in northeastern Ohio, it's got a lot of attention for kind of losing manufacturing and things going offshore. And it's kind of had a really, really tough past couple decades. But there's this renewed interest and kind of this renewed surge around electric vehicles and electric batteries. And so what they call the Mahoning Valley, and that's what it's been known as for years, they're now calling Voltage Valley because they're building electric vehicles. There's electric car manufacturers. General Motors, they have a big billion-dollar plant there with a South Korean joint venture partner. And so that's going to be, a huge role as General Motors, which in the past few months has announced they're going all electric, I think by 2035 maybe.
Yeah.
And so, that's an Ohio thing that's going to be able to do it. We also have in the Dayton area, which is a smaller kind of major metro hub, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is a massive, and I think it's the largest single site employer in the state of Ohio. But even a lot of people in Ohio don't know about it.
Wow.
And so that's a big Air Force facility that employs a ton. They do a ton of R&D. And so there's some really cool stories about like drones and flying cars and partnerships with NASA that are being built there. So there's like all these little pockets, which make it really fun and interesting.
We have the same thing. So it's cool to like here in other parts of the country, you see different tech clusters or segments. I don't know if you're aware, but like Oregon's really known for the semiconductor industry, which makes sense with Intel. And so we have a lot of that in different pockets, but I think we've also become known as like a software city, Portland in particular. So that's cool to hear that you have that going on as well. So when you sit here in this leadership role, what do you think of are some of the strengths of Ohio's tech and innovation ecosystem? I mean, it sounds like you've got some industry leaders from car manufacturing. So like, what else is really strong? And then conversely, like, where do you see some weaknesses and opportunities for growth?
Sure. So the biggest one, and this has nothing to do with me, so it's just cool to talk about, is in our 3Cs. So again, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. Over the past year or so, the state of Ohio, led by our governor and lieutenant governor, and our economic development agency called Jobs Ohio, they've made tech and innovation a real center point for a lot of their economic development focus. So what they did is they went into the three big C's, as we call them, our three biggest cities, and they went to the local institutions that have been around and doing great work for many years. So in Columbus, Ohio, it's Ohio State University and it's Nationwide Children's Hospital and some of the other healthcare providers. And so they're doing that same thing in each of the different cities to build these innovation districts. And so what they call them is the Cleveland Innovation District or the Columbus Innovation District or the Cincinnati Innovation District. And so the one kind of uniter between all of these, again, is the state of Ohio and our state government. But then in each city, it's local led. And so in Cincinnati, it's led by the University of Cincinnati and some of the folks down there. In Cleveland, it's led by groups like the Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the most famous healthcare providers in the world, and some of the local universities. And so that's probably been the biggest story over the past year, because these aren't just commitments for saying, hey, we're going to do innovation, but they're massive physical investments. So they're building facilities, they're building R&D. They're also committing to turning out and graduating, because all the universities are partnering on this, new STEM graduates. And so there's this whole kind of innovation ecosystem, and they'll look at groups like in Pittsburgh and what they've done with their innovation district, and also across the world to hopefully build this up. But kind of back to what Ohio does, there's a lot of themes around healthcare and some of those other topics that make, it's kind of, we're really spread out 4.5 hours apart between all these cities, but that healthcare kind of component, if you connect them all together, there's a lot of synergy.
I love that. And then, so there's the synergy. Where do you think there's opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, so improvement, I think, is largely just we're not the West Coast, and I'm sure, in Portland, you're seeing a ton of people coming from San Francisco or Seattle that are moving there. And so I think historically in Ohio, people don't think of us as a tech state. They think of us as maybe manufacturing or legacy things like insurance. But what we've seen are spinouts of tech. And so in Columbus, where I'm at, we're becoming this insurtech hub that companies like Nationwide Insurance, for instance, which have been around, I think a Fortune 75 company or something like that. A lot of people that have been working there are now starting their own insurance tech companies. And so kind of bringing innovation to that space, which is a really good business, and as it turns out. And so we had an IPO that happened this past fall, which was kind of the biggest tech success story. But there's more and more of these that are building up and popping up. And so I think that's like our opportunity. Is the next Facebook or Twitter probably is not going to be built in Ohio, but it's tech and innovation around the sectors and industries we're really good at. And so I think partially it's talent attraction, because as we've seen, people leaving those big coastal hubs like San Francisco or New York and wanting to go elsewhere. So we're seeing people return home. And I think this is our opportunity, whether it's these really big dollar investments like these innovation districts, which are billions of dollars, or just people returning home and coming to Ohio to work in tech, whether it's remote or build something or join something here. I think we have this opportunity to show people that we're not just a boring state. One of the kind of challenges we have, in addition to kind of just tech in general, is we're going to lose a congressional seat because our population isn't growing as fast as southern states or western states.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of, we're not shrinking, but we're just not growing as rapidly as other places.
Sorry, I'm having the work from home moment where my dog is desperate to come and join us. Come on. Okay, this is Toby, everybody.
Hey, Toby.
That's really interesting. And, I know you've leveraged the Techna network as you've built OhioX. You should totally check out TechPoint in Indiana if you have not, for their recruitment strategy, because you're right. Like, who thinks I'm going to go to Ohio and work for a tech startup? And that's a hard narrative to overcome. But we have the same thing. Like, I'm not going to go to Eastern Oregon to do a tech startup. Well, why not? Like, there's some interesting things there from a forestry and an ag and a manufacturing perspective. So, okay, glad we're all seeing the same sort of trends.
For sure.
Including one that's greatly accelerated as a result of COVID. And you sort of touched on this, this expansion of remote work. It's increasing mobility. You've sort of mentioned that it's hard to attract and retain tech talent, but what kind of strategies are you taking to do that at a statewide level and to support the members of OhioX?
Yeah, great question. And that's, I think, been one of the cooler things that's come out of the pandemic that I've seen, where partially in OhioX, we consider ourselves in some ways a media organization. We don't do investigative journalism like Columbus Dispatch or the Atlanta Journal-Constitution or anyone like that, but we're storytellers. And so we try to tell the stories, as we say, of the people, companies, and ideas. And partially that was in response to some of the challenges we heard in the process of building OhioX, and that people don't know what's going on. And so, as I've talked about a number of times at this point, we have all these regional silos. And so what we heard was there wasn't really a place you could go to find statewide tech stories or hear about statewide things. So that's what we did. And so, whether it's podcasts or interview series like this, just telling that and promoting, because oftentimes in our state, the good work and the good ideas and the good people, they exist. That's not the challenge. It's just an awareness issue. And so we said, hey, how can we kind of change that? And so as we've done that, especially in COVID, when people are more receptive to virtual events or looking to potentially make a change, whether for their career or lifestyle, because they want to move back home or have a yard, those types of things, we have found that people have kind of made their entry back into Ohio because of what we're doing. And that's been really fun and rewarding to see. And so probably once a week, I talk with someone who's in, again, New York or San Francisco, and they're trying to figure out, hey, what's the lay of the land for Ohio? What does it look like? And it's not just about getting that first job, but it's about getting, maybe that second job 2 or 3 years later, or if that first one doesn't work out, you want to know that you're moving to a place where there's a lot of career opportunities. And so, we're able to tell those stories. That only goes so far, and our state has been really aggressive in promoting and recruiting. And there's, I think, $50 million in our governor's budget this year proposed that is going to go to recruiting folks back home. And so, there's all these pieces that go into it. But again, I think for any place, especially outside of Silicon Valley or the New York cities of the world, the time's now. And it's not just a matter of leave San Francisco, come to Ohio. There's a million places people can go. So I think people have to get really competitive and really, kind of really think through what makes us different than a Nashville or Atlanta or Charlotte or anywhere else.
Yeah, I love that. And I also so in my head, I imagine that each of the big C's probably is a little competitive with each other. And
Absolutely.
so you've kind of taken those competitive stories and made it a much more collaborative environment for the industry, which I think is really critical. I mean, we see having to do the same thing. Okay, so speaking with that, and then what's the next job? So this is a trend that predated COVID, but it's the fact that every tech company, every company is becoming a tech company. So I joke from my hometown roots that Delta used to be an airline. Delta is now a tech company that just happens to fly you around the world. And so are there large enterprises, and we know GM, and you've mentioned the Cleveland Clinic, but who else that are increasingly important stakeholders that you wouldn't traditionally consider tech that you are starting to consider because of this whole digital transformation that's been rapidly accelerated by the COVID chapter?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite, and this is very recent, is Kroger, which is a grocery supermarket chain. And I was watching CNBC earlier, and Warren Buffett's a big investor of theirs. They're out of the Cincinnati area, and they're testing drone delivery for groceries up to 5 pounds. And so actually this summer, there's a city that's not too far from their headquarters in Ohio that this is going to be tested at. And so how cool is that? People think of Amazon and some of these really big tech companies, but it's happening in Ohio by Ohio companies. And that's just one example where, we're kind of seeing it all around, whether it's Kroger, what they're doing, some of these companies in kind of financial services or insurance that are kind of doing innovation, and certainly healthcare. That's, as I know I've mentioned a few times, but the healthcare in our state, I really truly believe you can put it up with anywhere in the world of the research, the development, the quality of care, whether it's the Cleveland Clinic or a group like University Hospitals up in Cleveland, and you come down to Ohio, Ohio's capital, Columbus, and Ohio State's here. And I once had a procedure at Ohio State, and I can literally walk there, and it's like I can see it from my place. And I remember checking in, and they ask, "Where are you coming to us from today?" And they're thinking you're flying in from halfway across the world. And I was like, "Oh, I actually walked here." And they're like, "Oh, that's really odd, actually, because typically people are coming here for the care because it's so good." And so, we're seeing a ton of R&D and a ton of innovation in that stuff. And again, it's these things that our state is already good at and have been at for a really long time. But we just have a lot of forward-thinking leaders that are now talking about how to kind of take it to, to have a true global, innovative impact.
I love that about where did you come from? My mom passed away from colon cancer about 8 years ago, but for the 10 years that she was sick, she was a patient at the Cleveland Clinic. And so I'm well aware, and did not live in Ohio. So I'm well aware of the standard of care. And that's really cool to know that you pride yourself on a state, as a state on that from a global perspective. That's very cool. Okay, so we've seen a lot of this current year. With our legislative session, we are tracking, I think, more bills than we've ever tracked because so many have to do with digitization and access to the internet. So, and we're finishing our 10-year innovation strategy. So how would you characterize Ohio's political environment when it comes to tech and innovation? And it sounds like in the last 18 months, the governor has made a lot of investments, but are you seeing policy sort of change to really support that type of innovation? Because that's tough.
Yeah, it is. And I would say our current administration is probably by far the most technologically and innovative focused administration that we've ever had. And so our lieutenant governor, who runs in a tandem ticket with our governor, he has led what is called Innovate Ohio. And it's a organization within state government that's, led by our second highest executive to make Ohio the most innovative entrepreneurial state in the Midwest. And so that's looking at what's happening in state government for citizens. So when I got my new driver's license renewed, I was able to actually check in online. And so I did it at home, and instead of waiting for an hour and a half on a Saturday morning, I checked in online, timed it up, and waited 10 minutes and was able to be in and out really quickly. And so there's little things like that, or using artificial intelligence to look at kind of laws and rules and regulations and where the redundancies might be. And so that's kind of like within state government. And then outside, it's, again, these innovation districts, which take that leadership, because to bring all the powers that be in all these different cities to the table, and to be able to make these announcements in all three cities within the same year, two of which were done in the middle of COVID. The other one was literally like 2 weeks before. And so there's just like this really, really, really big focus upon our leadership that, that's really tough, because there's a lot of, across the world, there's a lot of community groups and kind of grassroots organizations. But for, I think, for places that aren't Silicon Valley or maybe Boston, when we've seen these innovative hubs pop up, whether it's like in Israel or Singapore or some of even these like Baltic states, a lot of times it's that political leadership that leads the way. And so that's what's been really cool to see on our end, because it takes, that's the toughest part, at least in some ways, I think.
I agree. I think that, and that's cool that you like mentioned the Balkan countries. So like, I guess Estonia has like a digital ID for all of its residents. And yes, it's a small country, but it's pretty impressive that you can have over 1 million people all having a digital ID that can be used across the entire country for various services. And it takes some political leadership. So I've got 2 questions left, and one is still in the political vein. Ohio's elected leader, including the governor, have been active promoters and supporters of this innovation agenda. And again, you've mentioned like $50 million, but are there other innovation related priorities in the governor's proposed budget, particularly in light of what you were saying? It's the most innovative and technologically savvy administration. And, personally, I spend a lot of time doing workforce stuff, and I know exactly how much our budget allocates to computer science training, and I'm like horrified by it. So what are the other priorities outside of those actual innovation hubs? Because there's the whole future of the state too.
Yeah, so and one, I'll share 2. One was actually signed into law yesterday. So this is broadband expansion. So in Ohio, which is crazy to think, in the year 2021, about 1 million Ohioans lacked access to high quality internet. And we know, again, in this past year, how important that is, more so than ever, whether it's kids going to school online or people having to work from home online. And that's crazy to think. 1 million Ohioans out of 11 and a half didn't have it. And you see it as you talk with people, and it can be in big cities where there's kind of this internet desert, or as I'll talk with a superintendent in southeastern Ohio, which is Appalachia, very rural, and they'll say half of our district doesn't have good internet at home, or maybe even any internet at all. And so that was a bill that's kind of been in the works for a long time. And what I think is really cool, and a lot of others, is that it brought together people from all parts of the conversation, Democrats, Republicans. It brought together competing business forces that maybe historically don't see eye to eye on this, but it was a group that knew that there was an issue. We were tackling something it's been a problem for a long time, but more so than ever now. And so that was just signed into law yesterday. And so that's been a big push in our state government to make sure and to correct that challenge. And then I would say a second one is we have, also led by our lieutenant governor, again, who heads up a lot of this innovative work. It's the Office of Workforce Transformation, and it's a program called TechCred, which basically identifies credentials that employees can earn, and it'll reimburse employers, that will then pay for it. And so it's this way to help upskill our workforce. And so that's been a massive success. And as you talk with companies, they just absolutely love it. And that was something that didn't exist. And so they're hoping to kind of boost it up and do more even, this next year than they have been. And it's been a tremendous success where Ohioans are able to learn new digital skills. And it's across the board, but tech has the biggest focus, I think, just because there's just, as we all know, there's so much innovation and rapid emerging technologies that are out there. And so that's been an area, this TechCred program, that, has kind of proven itself in a bit of a pilot project for the first year or so. And they're really hoping to expand it this next year.
That's incredible. Okay, I lied. I have two questions. So does OhioX have some advocacy work that they do? Like, do you support these bills through your membership, or just kind of your own sort of vision of what the state should look like?
Yeah. And so it's, again, as I mentioned, and we're new. And so we're literally building everything for the first time. One of the cool things that we've done in the past probably 6 or 7 months at this point is we've built out committees where these meet monthly. There are members, because as we're growing and scaling, more and more people were interested in getting involved. So we have them around diversity, equity, and inclusion, education and workforce, startups, and then we also have a public policy one. And so just about 2 weeks ago at this point, we hosted our first tech policy summit, which brought together folks from the private sectors and the public sectors. And it was a full day virtual conversation with panels and keynotes around these topics. And so what we found is that a lot of times the best thing that we're doing at the moment is just having these conversations, because it didn't really exist before we were doing this, at least in a kind of a big way. And so that was like our first kind of big event. Each month we host what we call a tech town hall, where we're able to bring in elected officials and policymakers and have a conversation with the tech community. And so we're doing more and more of that. And then, as we continue to grow and develop and mature, kind of getting involved, probably what you all do and Skip does, of actually, getting involved in the State House and having those conversations. So it's been fun to kind of see the evolution of this side of it.
Yeah, this morning he is testifying for our workforce modernization bill. So, and yesterday I submitted testimony for a STEM education program. So it's great that you're doing the same work. All right, before we leave, here's my last question, and I think this is the most important one of the day. I've heard you reference University of Ohio State. And I was curious because I thought that the was always pretty heavily enunciated. You've said Ohio State University, and I'm like, is it not the Ohio State University?
It's the Ohio State University. And then, probably after that first reference, then we'll just go Ohio State or OSU, but it's definitely the Ohio State University.
I mean,
all around town, you see the.
We're both University of Georgia fans, so we don't say the, but I got my purse here. And that's it, Chris. Thanks for your time this morning. You're doing awesome work, and I'm excited to see how OhioX evolves as you come out of the pandemic and can do more stuff in person. And we'll be here cheering for you from the other O State out here on the West Coast.
Well, thank you. And thanks to you and Skip and the whole team, because it's been fun to follow along and see that we weren't crazy, and that there's actually really great groups out there that are doing incredible work, and yours is right at the top of the list. And so it's been fun to see what Oregon's up to and how you all have built this and are continuing to build some really, really great things for your state. So we're big fans in Ohio, and thanks for showing us the way.
Absolutely. And we like your innovation, so we're going to copy some of the stuff you do too.
That's
This
awesome.
is the best part of this network.
It
Hey,
is.
hope you have an awesome day. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you in person at some point, because we will get together again.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.